The summit station floated in the darkness above Keth Prime, a small planet on the edge of known space. Inside the massive structure, 43 different alien species gathered for the Galactic Cooperation Summit. They came to talk about trade routes, territory boundaries, and peace agreements. Among them was a small group from Earth. Humanity was new to the galactic community. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 15 years ago. Ambassador Vrenthor watched the human delegation with interest. He was from the Kulathi species, beings who looked like tall lizards with silver scales. His people were known for logic and careful thinking. Humans confused him. They brought their families to diplomatic meetings. Children ran through the station corridors while serious negotiations happened in the conference rooms. No other species did this. Vrenthor made notes in his datapad. Human behavior was strange. They seemed to care more about emotions than logic. They made decisions based on feelings. The Kulathi laid thousands of eggs each year and left them to survive on their own. It worked well for his species. But humans had only 1 or 2 children at a time. They protected these children intensely. Vrenthor found it inefficient but interesting. Captain Taman Kang stood near a viewport, watching ships come and go from the station. He was the commander of Earth's small escort fleet, 3 cruisers and 12 combat shuttles, not much compared to the massive fleets of older civilizations. But Earth was young. They were learning. His daughter Jiwan ran up to him excited. She was 12 years old with bright eyes and a quick smile. She wore a blue jumpsuit like the other children going on the cultural tour. "Dad, we're leaving in 10 minutes, Jiwan said. "Lieutenant Park says we'll see the crystal forests and the floating mountains." Taman smiled and touched her shoulder. "Stay close to Lieutenant Park. Listen to her instructions." "I always do," Jiwan said. "She's the best." She was right. Lieutenant Hyeri Park was one of the best pilots in the Earth fleet. She was young but skilled. Taman trusted her completely. 17 human children would be on that transport, along with Park and 2 junior officers. Just a simple tour of Keth Prime's northern hemisphere. Nothing dangerous. The transport departed on schedule. Vrenthor watched it leave from the observation deck. He noticed that Captain Kang watched too, his face calm but his eyes focused on the small ship until it disappeared from view. The Kulathi ambassador found this behavior odd. Why worry? The children were just taking a tour. They would return in a few hours. Inside the transport, Lieutenant Park sat in the pilot's seat, running through system checks. Everything looked good. The children sat in the passenger compartment talking and laughing. Some pressed their faces against the windows, watching Keth Prime grow larger as they descended. Jiwan sat near the front, helping some of the younger kids with their safety harnesses. She was good at taking charge without being bossy. The other children listened to her. "Everyone secure?" Park called back. "We're entering the atmosphere in 2 minutes." The children cheered. Park smiled. This was the good part of her job. Battle simulations and combat training were important, but showing kids the wonders of space mattered too. The transport shook slightly as it hit the upper atmosphere. Normal turbulence. Park adjusted their course, aiming for the northern continent. The crystal forests were beautiful this time of year. The children would love them. Then the alarm started screaming. Park's training kicked in instantly. Her hands flew across the controls. The sensor showed a micrometeor shower, small pieces of rock and ice moving at incredible speed. The station's detection system had missed it somehow. Now the meteors were all around them. "Hold on," Park shouted. She threw the transport into evasive maneuvers. The ship twisted and turned, engines straining. Most of the meteors missed, but not all of them. The first impact hit the port engine. Metal screamed. Warning lights flooded the cockpit. Park fought the controls as the ship started spinning. A second impact tore through the navigation system. A third punctured the hull in 2 places. "Emergency seals activated," the computer announced in a calm voice that contrasted with the chaos. The children were screaming now. Park couldn't blame them. She wanted to scream too, but she was the pilot, the adult, the protector. She pushed the fear down and focused. "Jiwan," Park called. "Get everyone into crash positions now." The girl moved immediately, her voice cutting through the panic. "Everyone listen. Heads down, arms over your head. Do it now." Park had maybe 30 seconds to find a landing spot. The transport was falling fast. One engine was dead. The other was dying. She had minimal control. Below, she could see terrain rushing up. Mountains, forests, and there, a flat area near a canyon. It would have to do. Park aimed for the flat ground and fired the emergency thrusters. The ship shuddered. She managed to slow their descent slightly. Not enough to avoid a crash, but maybe enough to survive one. The transport hit the ground hard. Metal crumpled. Systems exploded. Park's head smashed against the console despite her harness. Pain flared bright and hot. The ship bounced once, twice, then skidded across the rocky ground, tearing itself apart. Finally, after what felt like forever but was probably only seconds, the transport stopped moving. Park sat in the destroyed cockpit, blood running down her face. Her ribs felt broken. Everything hurt. But she was alive. She forced herself to move, to unbuckle her harness, to turn around. Jiwon? Anyone sound off? We're okay, Jiwon's voice came back, shaky but strong. Everyone's alive. Some injuries, but nothing critical. Park wanted to cry with relief. Instead, she activated the emergency beacon and checked their position. Her heart sank. They had crashed in the Dark Reach territory, the region controlled by Thalnari separatists. These aliens did not recognize the summit's authority. They were hostile to outsiders. On the summit station, Captain Taemin Kang was in a meeting when the alert came through. His communications officer burst into the conference room, her face pale. Sir, the civilian transport has crashed. Dark Reach territory. The room went silent. Everyone understood what that meant. The Dark Reach territory was dangerous. War Chief Grix controlled that region, and he had no love for the summit or its representatives. Taemin stood slowly. His face showed no emotion, but his hands clenched into fists. Ambassador Vrenthor, watching from across the room, saw something in the human captain's eyes that made his scales prickle. It was the look of a predator that had been pushed too far. High Arbiter Moltek, Taemin said, his voice perfectly calm. I am deploying my fleet to retrieve our people. The High Arbiter, a tall being covered in gray fur, held up one hand. Captain, we must follow diplomatic protocols. The Dark Reach territory is sovereign space. We need to negotiate with War Chief Grix. How long will that take? Taemin asked. Several hours, perhaps a day, to arrange proper channels, and my daughter is down there, Taemin interrupted quietly. So are 16 other children. I am informing you of my intentions, not requesting permission. We are going to get them. Stay out of our way. He turned and walked out of the conference room. Commander Doyeon Choi followed immediately. Within minutes, the human fleet was preparing for departure. Vrenthor stood at the observation window, watching the human ships power up their engines. He began recording observations in his datapad. The other ambassadors were calling this an overreaction. Humans being emotional and irrational as usual, but Vrenthor was not so sure. He had studied predator species before. He recognized the signs. Humans were not panicking. They were not being irrational. They were being very, very dangerous. He made a note. Recommend immediate revision of human threat assessment. Previous classifications appear inadequate. On the planet's surface, Lieutenant Park had organized the crash site into a defensive position. The children were secured in the least damaged section of the wreckage. She had found 2 working weapons and some emergency supplies. It was not much, but it would have to be enough. Jiwon helped the younger children stay calm. She told them stories and played games, keeping their minds off their situation. Park watched the girl work and felt proud. The kid was strong. Then Park's sensors picked up movement, vehicles approaching from the east. Lots of them, the Thalnari had found them. The human fleet withdrew as suddenly as it had appeared. The Dark Reach territory was left with its military capacity reduced to almost nothing, but remarkably, there were 0 civilian casualties. Within hours, humanitarian supplies began arriving, delivered by the same human forces that had just demonstrated their capacity for destruction. War Chief Grix sat in his ruined command center and understood, too late, that he had made a terrible mistake. He had thought humans were weak because they cared about their children. He had not understood that caring about children made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. 3 days after the rescue, the summit station buzzed with tension. The human delegation had been isolated in their quarters while various councils debated what to do about the military action. Some species wanted sanctions. Others wanted apologies. A few wanted humanity expelled from the galactic community entirely. In the medical bay, Lieutenant Hyeri Park woke up in a comfortable bed. Her ribs were wrapped. Her head no longer hurt, Machines beeped softly around her. For a moment she panicked, not remembering where she was or what had happened. Then she saw the gifts. Her room was filled with flowers, crystals, data pads, and objects from dozens of different species. Messages of respect and admiration covered every surface. Military officers from across the galaxy had sent their regards to the human who held the line against impossible odds. A nurse entered, a small being with blue skin and 4 arms. She smiled when she saw Park awake. "You are famous, Lieutenant Park. Everyone wants to meet the human who stood alone against 300 warriors." Park blinked. "I was not alone. The children were with me." "Exactly," the nurse said softly. "That is why everyone respects you." High Arbiter Moltek had made an unusual decision. He requested that the children testify before the council. Most species in the summit had never directly interacted with human juveniles. This would be a chance to understand them better. Jiwon Kim stood in the massive council chamber, feeling very small. Hundreds of alien beings looked down at her from their seats. Some looked curious, others looked angry. She took a deep breath and tried to remember her father's advice. "Tell the truth, be clear. Don't be afraid." High Arbiter Moltek spoke gently. "Jiwon Kim, can you tell us what happened when your transport crashed?" Jiwon described everything. The meteor shower, the crash, Lieutenant Park's bravery, the fear they all felt, the long hours waiting for rescue. She spoke simply and honestly. "Were you afraid?" an ambassador asked. "Yes," Jiwon said, "but I knew help would come." "How could you be certain?" another asked. Jiwon looked confused by the question. "Because we are human children. Our adults do not abandon us, ever. That is just what being human means." Silence filled the chamber. Many of the ambassadors looked uncomfortable. Their species did not work that way. They laid eggs or had many offspring and let them survive on their own. The human way was strange to them. Ambassador Vrenthor stood to present his comprehensive report on human behavior. He had spent the last 3 days barely sleeping, compiling all his observations into a detailed analysis. The document was hundreds of pages long, but his conclusions were simple. Humans are what we call a K-selected species taken to an evolutionary extreme. Vrenthor explained. They produce very few offspring and invest enormous resources into each one. This creates a biological imperative where threats to children trigger responses that override normal rational behavior. He brought up data on his display. "My analysis shows that humans will accept almost unlimited casualties and economic damage when protecting their young. This is not a cultural trait. It is biological. They cannot choose to act differently any more than we can choose to stop breathing." Fleet Coordinator Echelani added her own tactical analysis. The Virathi hive mind had processed all the battle data. Their conclusions troubled her. Human military doctrine changes completely when young are threatened. Acceptable casualty rates increase by factors of 10. Economic considerations become irrelevant. Rules of engagement shift from proportional response to absolute victory. My species shows similar behavior only when defending the queen. Humans exhibit it for any of their young. The council chamber erupted in debate. Some species argued for sanctions against humanity. Others pointed out that War Chief Grix had initiated the hostilities. A third group, led by species with similar parental investment strategies, began to see humanity differently. One ambassador, a being that resembled a walking tree, spoke quietly but firmly. "Perhaps the question is not whether humanity overreacted. Perhaps the question is why so many of us would not have reacted at all." That statement changed the tone of the debate. Captain Taemin Kang was finally allowed to address the council. He stood calmly in the center of the chamber, surrounded by hundreds of alien beings who held his fate in their hands. Some wanted him arrested, others wanted his fleet disbanded. All wanted answers. High Arbiter Moltek spoke formally. "Captain Kang, you violated numerous protocols and treaties. You used military force without authorization. You deployed weapons banned by 17 galactic agreements. How do you justify these actions?" Kang met the Arbiter's eyes steadily. "My daughter was in danger. 16 other children were in danger. I did what any human parent would do. I protected them. At what cost?" an ambassador demanded. "You could have started a war." "Yes," Kang said simply. "I could have. And I would have. If protecting those children required starting a war, then I would have started a war. That is what you need to understand about humanity. Our children are not negotiable." He paused, then continued. Most of you do not have this problem. Your species lay eggs by the hundreds or thousands. You leave them to survive on their own. That works for you, but humans are different. We have 1 or 2 children at a time. We teach them for years. We protect them with everything we have. To harm a human child is not just an attack on an individual. It is an attack on our entire species' future. So you admit you would violate any law to protect your young? Another ambassador asked. Yes, Kang said without hesitation. Any law. Any treaty. Any agreement. If you write a law that says I cannot protect my child, then that law is meaningless to me. The chamber erupted in shocked voices, but Kang raised his hand for silence. Surprisingly, the chamber quieted. But I want you to understand something else, Kang continued. We stopped the moment the children were safe. We could have destroyed the entire Darkreach territory. We had the weapons and the motivation, but we did not. Because revenge is not our goal. Protection is. Once the threat was eliminated, we stopped. He looked around the chamber slowly. You want to know what happened? The cubs crawled into our campfire circle, and we held our silence until someone tried to hurt them. Then we reminded the universe why humans are the most dangerous thing to come out of Earth. Not because we are violent, but because we know exactly when violence is necessary. In a small conference room, War Chief Grix's replacement met with Captain Kang privately. The new Thalnari leader was younger, less arrogant. She had watched the battle recordings. She understood what had happened. My people value strength, she said. Grix thought your concern for children was weakness. He was wrong. Protecting the vulnerable is the greatest strength of all. She offered full reparations and requested human assistance in rebuilding. More surprisingly, she asked if humans would help reform Thalnari warrior training to include protection of non-combatants as a core value. Kang agreed. Lieutenant Park received visitors every day. Military officers from dozens of species came to pay their respects. Many brought their own children, wanting them to meet the human who had stood alone. One officer, a massive being with 6 arms, asked her a question that many were thinking. Why did you not evacuate when the human fleet arrived? You were injured. Your duty was fulfilled. Why stay? Park looked at him in confusion. Those were children in my care. I do not leave my post until they are safe. That is not a human thing. That is a person thing. At least it should be. The officer left thoughtful. Many did. High Arbiter Moltek finally announced the tribunal's decision. The entire summit waited to hear the verdict. Would humanity be punished? Expelled? Would there be war? Moltek spoke carefully. This tribunal finds that while human actions violated numerous protocols and treaties, the fundamental cause was War Chief Grix's decision to threaten protected civilians. We also recognize that galactic law failed to account for species-specific protection instincts. He continued, therefore we establish new precedents. Species have the right to protect their young by any means necessary. When standard diplomatic channels fail, threatening juveniles of any species is reclassified as an act of war, rather than a diplomatic incident. The chamber erupted in debate again, but Moltek was not finished. Most significantly, we recognize that humanity exercised considerable restraint, given their demonstrated capabilities. They could have done far more damage. They chose not to. This shows wisdom along with strength. He looked at Captain Kang directly. We have learned that we share this galaxy with a species that will cross any line to protect their young. This could be terrifying. Instead, I propose we recognize it as the most reliable trait any species could possess. If humanity will fight this hard for 17 children, imagine what they might do for their allies. Moltek paused. The question before us is simple. Do we want to be the ones standing outside humanity's campfire circle, or within it? The vote took hours. When it concluded, humanity was not only cleared of charges but invited to join several mutual defense pacts. Multiple species requested human military advisors. Many more requested cultural exchanges focused on child protection. Ambassador Vrenthor watched the votes come in. His report had changed many minds. But more than that, watching Jiwon Kim testify had changed hearts. The galaxy had seen human children. They had seen human parents. They had seen what humans would do when those two things were threatened. And they had decided they wanted humans as friends, not enemies. That night, Jiwon visited Lieutenant Park in the medical bay. The two sat quietly for a while, not needing words. They had survived something terrible together. That bond would never break. Lieutenant Park, Jiwan finally said. Thank you for holding the line. Park smiled. Thank you for being brave enough to be worth holding it for. 6 months after the incident, the summit concluded with the signing of the Keth Prime Accords. The massive document represented fundamental changes to galactic diplomacy. 43 species signed, agreeing to new frameworks for cooperation and mutual defense. But the most important section was the Juvenile Protection Treaty. The treaty established universal rights for young members of all species. It created an emergency response protocol that allowed military intervention to protect endangered children, regardless of diplomatic status. Most significantly, the Campfire provision formally recognized that species-specific protection instincts superseded diplomatic protocol when juveniles were in danger. Not everyone was happy about it. Some species argued that the Accords gave too much power to aggressive species like humanity, but a surprising coalition of diverse species defended the changes. As one ambassador put it, a civilization that will not protect children is not worth protecting. Lieutenant Hyeri Park stood at the window of her new quarters, looking out at the stars. She had recovered fully from her injuries, though the doctors said it was remarkable she survived at all. She had been offered a promotion and a comfortable position at Earth Fleet Command. She turned it down. Instead, Park became the chief instructor for a new cross-species training program, focused on protecting non-combatants during crisis situations. Her first class included officers from 23 species. Many were skeptical about learning from a human. On the first day, Park stood before the class and addressed their doubts directly. You are here because your superiors think humans have some special secret about protecting the vulnerable. We do not. What we have is the absolute certainty that some lines cannot be crossed no matter the cost. That certainty is not uniquely human. It is universal. You just have to decide what lines matter enough to defend. One student, a tall being with scales like Vrenthor, raised a hand. But Lieutenant Park, how do we know which lines are worth defending with our lives? Park smiled. That is easy. If you have to ask whether something is worth dying for, it probably is not. But if you know instantly without thinking that you would die to protect it, that is your line. Find it, remember it, defend it. The 17 human children who survived the crash had become unlikely ambassadors. Their presence at the summit, once considered a diplomatic weakness, had fundamentally changed how many species viewed humanity. Children from other species began appearing at diplomatic events too. What was once seen as unprofessional became a gesture of trust. Jiwan Kim, now 13 years old, had made friends with young members of a dozen different species. She taught them games from Earth. They taught her games from their worlds. Language barriers meant nothing to children who wanted to play together. Ambassador Vrenthor watched the children play from a distance. His report on human psychology had become required reading for diplomatic corps across the galaxy. But more personally, his observations had changed him. He requested assignment as permanent ambassador to Earth. His stated reason was professional interest in continuing his research. The actual reason was different. He confided in Captain Kang during a private conversation. I spent my career believing that emotion was a weakness to be documented and dismissed, Vrenthor said. Then I watched your species willing to burn the galaxy to protect 17 children. I realized that my people are not more evolved or more logical. We are just more alone. I want to understand what it means to not be alone. Kang nodded. You are always welcome in our Campfire Circle, Ambassador. The Dark Reach territory underwent remarkable transformation. With human assistance, the Thalnari rebuilt their society around principles that honored strength, through protection rather than domination. War Chief Grix remained imprisoned, but he had become a cautionary tale taught to young Thalnari warriors. The new Thalnari leadership established a tradition. Warriors completing their training had to spend time protecting the vulnerable as proof of true strength. The program was advised by human military psychologists and transformed Thalnari culture in profound ways. Fleet Coordinator Eshlani presented a surprising proposal to her own people. The Varathi hive species, with its billions of drones, proposed establishing protected creche worlds where young of all species could develop under multi-species protection. The proposal was radical for the Varathi. They traditionally viewed individual lives as having value only in service to the hive, but Eshelani had been influenced by her observations of humanity. We have optimized for collective survival for 50 million cycles, she told the Virathi conclave. The humans have shown us that protecting individual young creates a different kind of strength. Not better or worse, but different. Perhaps the hive could benefit from learning this strength. The conclave approved the proposal. Within a year, the first multi-species creche world opened. It was named Hope Station, and humans helped design its defenses. No child on Hope Station would ever be unprotected. Captain Taemin Kang was offered promotion to Admiral and command of Earth's diplomatic fleet. He accepted on one condition. His daughter Jiwon would be allowed to continue her education aboard his flagship. The request was granted, establishing a precedent for family integration in human military service. During his promotion ceremony, Kang gave a speech that became part of human military tradition. 6 months ago, we showed the galaxy what humans do when our children are threatened. Today we begin showing them what we do when everyone's children are safe. We build, we teach, we protect. That is the real human story. The violence was necessary, but it was never the point. The point was always the campfire circle. The point was always making sure everyone inside it is safe. The speech was translated into hundreds of languages. Many species adopted similar principles. The galaxy was changing, slowly but surely, toward a civilization that valued protecting the vulnerable above almost everything else. Commander Doyen Choi, the officer who had directed the assault on the Dark Reach territory, took a different path. He resigned from active military duty and became a diplomat. His unique perspective, having seen both the necessity of violence and the cost of it, made him invaluable in negotiations. When asked why he changed careers, Choi's answer was simple. I learned that preventing fights is better than winning them, but you have to be willing to win them if prevention fails. That balance is what diplomacy should be. High Arbiter Moltek became an unexpected advocate for humanity. He traveled to dozens of systems explaining the Keth Prime incident and its lessons. Many species listened. Some changed their laws. A few changed their cultures, but not everyone was convinced. Some species still saw humanity as dangerous and unpredictable. They were right in a way. Humans were dangerous. But they were dangerous in defense, not in aggression. That distinction mattered. 1 year after the rescue, a memorial ceremony was held on Keth Prime. The crash site had been preserved as a monument. 17 human children stood there alongside representatives from 43 species. The monument bore a simple inscription in hundreds of languages. Here the line was held. Here the cubs were protected. Here the galaxy learned that civilization is measured not by power but by care. Jiwon gave a short speech, broadcast across the galaxy. She stood tall, no longer the frightened child from the crash but a young woman who had faced darkness and survived. A year ago, we were just kids on a field trip that went wrong. We were scared. We were hurt. But we were never alone. Lieutenant Park held the line. My father and his crew came for us. And something changed. She paused, looking at the assembled representatives. The galaxy learned what humans already knew. Protecting children is not about which species they belong to. It is about understanding that every child represents a future worth fighting for. We call this place the Campfire Circle now. It is a reminder that the light of civilization is measured by how we treat the most vulnerable among us. Jiwon smiled. Thank you all for letting us into your circle. And thank you for joining ours. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species stood together, united by a simple understanding. Children mattered. Protecting them mattered. Everything else was negotiable. Later that evening, Lieutenant Park found Captain Kang standing alone near the monument. She joined him in comfortable silence. They had both been changed by the events. They would carry those changes forever. Do you think it will last? Park asked. The changes. The treaties. The new understanding. Kang considered the question. Some of it will last. Some will not. But we planted a seed. The idea that protecting children should be universal. That idea will grow. Maybe slowly, maybe with setbacks, but it will grow. Park nodded. And if someone threatens children again? Kang's expression hardened slightly. Then they will learn the same lesson War Chief Grix learned. The Campfire Circle is sacred. The cubs inside it are protected, and anyone who forgets that will remember it very quickly. Above them, stars glittered in the night sky. Each star represented worlds, civilizations, species working to build something better. Not perfect, not without conflict, but better than before. And in the darkness between the stars, humanity stood watch, ready to build. Ready to teach, ready to protect, always ready to protect. 5 years after the Keth Prime incident, Ambassador Vrenthor published his final comprehensive study on humanity. The document was titled Understanding Earth and became required reading in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. But it was the final chapter that everyone remembered. The chapter was called the Campfire Paradox. In it, Vrenthor addressed the question that had troubled the galaxy since humans first joined the galactic community. Why did humanity frighten so many species while simultaneously becoming their most trusted ally? His conclusion was elegant in its simplicity. Humans were terrifying because they were capable of extreme violence in protection of the vulnerable. They were trustworthy for exactly the same reason. The species that would burn the galaxy to protect 17 children would never abandon an ally. The capacity for destruction and the instinct for protection were inseparable in human psychology. The galaxy had learned to judge species not by their capacity for violence but by when and why they chose to employ it. By that measure, humanity ranked among the most civilized species in known space despite being one of the youngest. Lieutenant Hyeri Park, now a commander, ran her training program from Hope Station. The multi-species creche world had become a symbol of the new galactic order. Children from hundreds of species grew up together here, learning from each other, playing together, becoming friends despite vast biological differences. Park's students came from 50 different species now. They learned tactical protocols, emergency response procedures, and crisis management. But more than that, they learned why these things mattered. Park made sure every student spent time with the children on Hope Station. Theory was important, but understanding who you were protecting was essential. One day, a young Thalnari officer asked Park a difficult question. "Commander, what do I do if my government orders me not to protect children? What if the politics say to wait, but the children need help now?" Park looked at the young warrior for a long moment. "Then you have to decide what kind of person you are. Are you someone who follows orders? Or are you someone who protects the innocent? Sometimes you can be both. Sometimes you cannot. Only you can make that choice," she paused. "But I will tell you this. 5 years ago, Captain Kang disobeyed orders to save his daughter and 16 other children. Today he is an admiral and the entire galaxy respects him. Because in the end, civilizations remember those who chose correctly when it mattered most." Jiwon Kim was 18 now, a cadet at Earth's military academy. She had chosen to follow in her father's footsteps, but in her own way. She specialized in diplomatic security, combining military training with cultural studies. Her goal was to prevent incidents like the one she had survived. She gave lectures at various academies, sharing her experience. Many found it strange that someone who had been a victim would choose this path. Jiwon saw it differently. "I was not a victim," she told her audiences. "I was a survivor. There is a difference. Victims are helpless. Survivors learn, grow, and make sure it does not happen again. I survived because brave people protected me. Now it is my turn to protect others." Admiral Taemin Kang commanded Earth's diplomatic fleet from his flagship, appropriately named Guardian. The ship was designed differently from traditional warships. Yes, it had weapons, but it also had schools, medical facilities, and living quarters for families. It was a statement. Human military power existed to protect, not to conquer. The Guardian traveled from system to system, showing the human way. Other species began copying the design. Mixed-use vessels became common in the fleets of species that valued protection over pure military might. Commander Doyen Choi had become one of the most successful negotiators in the galaxy. His reputation was unique. Everyone knew he had directed the assault on the Dark Reach territory. Everyone knew he had been ruthless when necessary. But they also knew he worked tirelessly to make sure force was never necessary. When asked about his philosophy, Choi's answer never changed. Peace is not the absence of the capacity for violence. Peace is the choice not to use that capacity, but you must have the capacity or the choice is meaningless. Ambassador Vrenthor lived on Earth now, in a small apartment overlooking the ocean. He had completed his research, published his findings, and retired from active diplomacy. But he had not stopped learning about humans. He volunteered at a local school, helping human children learn about alien species. The children loved him. They asked endless questions about his scales, his world, his people. He answered them all patiently, finding joy in their curiosity. One day, a small human child asked him, "Mr. Vrenthor, Are you lonely being so far from home? Vrenthor thought carefully before answering. I used to be lonely even when I was home, but now I'm inside the campfire circle, and no one inside the circle is ever truly alone. The Dark Reach territory was unrecognizable from its former self. The Thalnari had rebuilt their society completely. Warriors still trained for combat, but now they also trained for rescue operations, disaster relief, and child protection. The strongest warriors competed for positions protecting schools and nurseries. War Chief Grix had been released from prison after 3 years. He lived quietly now, working at a school for orphaned children. His crime had been threatening children. His punishment was spending every day caring for them. Some called it cruel. Grix called it just. He wrote a book about his experience titled The Mistake. In it, he detailed how he had misunderstood humanity, miscalculated the response, and misjudged what mattered. The book concluded with a warning to other species. Humans are not weak because they love their children. They are dangerous because they love their children. Learn the difference before you make my mistake. Fleet Coordinator Echelani's proposal for protected creche worlds had expanded beyond Hope Station. 12 such worlds existed now, each one defended by mixed species forces. The Varathi provided the majority of personnel, having discovered that protecting individual young gave their hive mind new purpose and satisfaction. Echelani herself commanded the defense fleet for the creche worlds. She had changed profoundly from the logical coordinator, who once calculated 12% survival odds. Now she understood that some things could not be calculated. Some things simply had to be protected regardless of cost. High Arbiter Moltek stepped down from his position after overseeing the implementation of the Keth Prime Accords. He had aged visibly during those years, the stress of reshaping galactic law taking its toll. But he left satisfied. In his final speech, he said something that summarized the change. 5 years ago, a transport crashed and children were threatened. The galaxy watched to see what would happen. We saw violence, yes, but we also saw protection, courage, and sacrifice. We learned that civilization is not measured by technology or territory. It is measured by one simple question. What will you do when the innocent need help? The answer to that question defines us all. On the 5th anniversary of the rescue, the 17 survivors gathered on Hope Station. They were adults now, pursuing different paths. Some were military officers. Others were diplomats, teachers, engineers, artists. But they remained connected by the experience they shared. They stood together at a memorial garden planted in honor of Lieutenant Park's stand. Park herself joined them, older now but still strong. Admiral Kang came, proud of his daughter and all the children who had survived that day. Jiwon, now an officer herself, spoke for all of them. We were children when we crashed. We were scared when we were surrounded. But we were never defeated, because humans do not abandon their children. And now, because of what happened to us, the galaxy understands that. Not perfectly, not everywhere, but more than before. She paused, emotion thick in her voice. We did not ask to be symbols. We just wanted to survive. But if our survival helped change the galaxy for the better, then maybe it was worth it. Maybe every moment of fear, every hour of waiting, every second of doubt was worth it. The other survivors nodded. They had carried the weight of being symbols for 5 years. But looking at Hope Station, seeing children of dozens of species playing safely together, they understood that their experience had mattered. That evening, as artificial stars lit the station's sky, the survivors sat together around a symbolic campfire. Species from across the galaxy joined them. Ambassador Vrenthor was there, Commander Choi, Fleet Coordinator Eshlani, even some reformed Thalnari warriors. They shared stories, food, and friendship. The campfire circle had grown large enough to encompass beings who once would have been enemies. But now they were something else. Protectors, guardians, members of a civilization that valued life above all else. Admiral Kang looked around the circle and felt satisfaction. This was what they had fought for. Not dominance, not revenge, just this. A place where children could be safe, where species could trust each other, where the vulnerable were protected by the strong. The campfire circle had expanded to encompass the galaxy. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. Enough to make a difference. Enough to build on. Enough to give hope that the future would be better than the past. And in the darkness beyond the light, humanity stood watch. Always ready to protect, always willing to sacrifice, always certain that some lines could never be crossed, because the cubs had crawled into the campfire circle, and the humans would never, ever let them go.